Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Narayana Namaskritya Naram Jaiv Narottamam Devim Saraswatim Vyasam Tato Jayam Diriye Nashtakrayesha Bhadresha Nityam Bhagavata Sevayam Bhagavati Uttam Shloke Bhaktir Bhavati Naishtaki. So continuing with the discussion on Srila Prabhupada Lilamrita by Satsvarup Das Goswami, Volume 2, Planting the Seed, New York City, 1965 to 1966, Chapter 17 on the Bowery. So Prabhupada and his followers, Michael Grant, Carl Jurgens, Gardiner, they got Prabhupada into, at least they got the contract at Matchless Gifts. So that is the picture of the shop that's in the background. Now it was time to move the Swami into his new place. A few friends who were on hand accompanied the Swami over to the Bowery loft. Maybe they weren't prepared to become his surrendered disciples, but contributing towards the first month's rent and volunteering a few hours of work to help set up his place were exactly the kind of things they could do very willingly. At the loft, they all gathered up portions of the Swami's belongings and then they started out on foot up Bowery. It was like a safari, a caravan of half a dozen men loaded with Prabhupada's things. Michael carried the heavy Roberts reel to reel, and even the Swami carried 2 suitcases. They did everything so quickly that it wasn't until they were well on their way and Mike's arm began to ache that he realized, why didn't we bring a car? Why did we just walk up there? It was the end of June and a hazy summer sun poured its heat down onto the Bowery jungle. Starting and stopping, the strange safari stretched for over a block, slowly trekking along. Prabhupada struggled with the suitcases, past a seemingly unending row of restaurant supply shops and lamp stores between Grand, Broome, and Spring Streets. Sometimes he paused and rested, setting his suitcases down. He was finally moving from the Bowery. His electrician friend on the 72nd Street would have been relieved, although perhaps he would have disapproved of the 2nd Avenue address also. At least he was finished residing on Skid Row. He walked on, past the homeless men outside the Salvation Army shelter, past the open-door taverns, stopping at streetlights, standing alongside total strangers, keeping an eye on the progress of his procession of friends who struggled along behind him. The Bowery artists and musicians saw him as highly evolved. They felt that the spirit was moving him and were eager to help him set up his own place so that he could do his valuable spiritual thing and spread it to others. He was depending on them for help, yet they knew he was on a higher level. He was his own protector, or as he said, God protected him. See, they just came along to help Prabhupada move, set up, paid his rent. They're not ready to become his disciple, although some of them they did become. The Swami and his young friends reached the corner of Bowery and Houston, turned right and proceeded east. Gazing steadily ahead as he walked, Prabhupada saw the southern end of 2nd Avenue, 1 block away. At 2nd Avenue, he would turn left, walk just 1 block north across First Street, and arrive at his new home. As he passed the IND subway entrance, the storefront came into view, Matchless Gifts. He gripped his suitcases and moved ahead. At 2nd Avenue and Houston, he hurried through a break in the rapid traffic. He could see green trees holding their heads above the high courtyard wall, reaching up like overgrown weeds in the space between the front and rear buildings of his new address. The street side building housed his meeting hall, the rear building the apartment where he would live and translate. Adjoining the storefront building on its north side was a massive 9-story warehouse. The storefront structure was only 6 stories and seemed appended to the larger building like its diminutive child. On its southern side, Prabhupada's new temple showed a surface of plain cement and was free of any adjoining structure. There was only the spacious lot of busy mobile service station that bordered on the first street. So mobile service station you can see in the picture on the right-hand side. As Prabhupada approached the storefront, he could see two small lanterns decorating the narrow doorway. There was no certainty of what awaited him there, but already there had been good signs that these American young people, mad enough they sometimes were, could actually take part in Lord Chaitanya's Sankirtan movement. Perhaps this new address would be the place where he could actually get a footing with his International Society for Krishna Consciousness. So thus ends chapter 17. We start next chapter, Breaking Ground. Swami Bhaktivedanta came to USA and went swiftly to the archetype spiritual neighborhood, the New York Lower East Side, and installed intact and ancient, perfectly preserved piece of street India. He adorned his storefront as his ashram and adored Krishna therein, and by patience and good humor, singing, chanting, and expounding Sanskrit terminology day by day, established Krishna consciousness in the psychedelic, mind-manifesting center of America, East. To choose to attend to the Lower East Side, what kindness and humility and intelligence. So Allen Ginsberg wrote this. Allen Ginsberg was a poet, and nice writings he had. Prabhupada's new neighborhood was not as run down as the nearby Bombay, though it certainly was less than quaint. Right across from his storefront, a row of tombstones looked out from the somber, dimly lit display windows of Wiesner Brothers and Paper Memorials. North of Wiesner Brothers were Sam's Luncheonette. Next to Sam's stood an ancient four-story building marked AIR, then Benjay Horowitz Monuments, and finally Schwartz Funeral Home. On the next block at number 43, a worn canvas awning jutted out onto the sidewalk. Provenzano Lanza Funeral Home. Then there was Cosmos Parcels, importers. And a few blocks further uptown, the prominent black and white signboard of the Village East Theatre. Up a block, but on the same side of the avenue as the storefront, was the Church of the Nativity, an old three-story building with new blue paint and a gold-colored cross on top. The sixth-story, 26 Second Avenue, its face covered by a greenish fire escape, crouched against a massive 9-story Knickerbocker fireproof warehouse. So we don't understand all this because it's difficult to visualize it. But anyway, Second Avenue was a main traffic artery from East Manhattan, and the stoplight at the intersection of Houston and Second pumped a stream of delivery trucks, taxis, and private autos past Prabhupada's door. From early morning until night, there would be cars zooming by, followed by the sound of brakes, the competitive tension of waiting bumper to bumper, and the impetuous honking, then gears grinding, engines rumbling and revving, and again the zooming by. The traffic was distractingly heavy. At 26 Second Avenue, there were actually two storefronts. The one to the north was a coin laundry, and the one to the south had been a gift shop, but was now vacant. Both had narrow entrances, large display windows, and dull paint. Beneath the matchless gift sign was a window 6 feet square that a few weeks before had displayed matchboxes, decorated with photos of movie stars of 30s and 40s. The sign, Matchless Gifts, was the only remaining memento of the nostalgic gift shop that had recently moved out. Below the shop's window, a pair of iron doors in the sidewalk hid stone steps in the cellar and the boiler room. The wide sidewalk had been laid down in sections of various shapes and sizes at different times, years past. Certain sections had cracked or caved in, and a fine dust with tiny sparkling shards of glass had collected in the cracks and depressions. A dull black fire hydrant stood on the curb. Midway between the entrances to the two storefronts was a main entrance to number 26. This door opened into a foyer lined with mailboxes and intercoms, and then a locked inner door opened into a hallway leading to the stairs or back to the courtyard. To the left of the gift shop's window was its front door, a dark wooden frame holding a full-length pane of glass. The door opened into the long, narrow storefront, which was now completely bare. Just inside, to the right of the door, a platform extending beneath the display window was just the proper height for a seat. At the far end of the bare, dingy room, two grimy paned windows covered with bars opened into the courtyard. To the left of the left-hand window was a small sink fixed to the outside of a very small toilet closet, whose door faced the front of the store. A door on the store's left wall connected to a hallway that led into the courtyard. Courtyard was paved with concrete geometric sections and encircled with shrub gardens and tall trees. There was a picnic table, a cement bird bath, and a bird house on a pole, and near the center of the courtyard were two shrub gardens. The courtyard was bordered north and south by high walls and front and back by the two tenements. The patch of sky above gave relief. Overlooking the courtyard from the rear building of 26 Second Avenue was Prabhupada's second-floor apartment, where he would now live, work, and worship. With help from his Bowery friends, he had cleaned and settled into his new home. In the back room, his office, he had placed against one wall a thin cushion with an elephant print cover, and in front of the cushion, his unpainted metal suitcase, which served as a desk. He had set his typewriter on the desk and his papers and books on either side. This became his work area. His manuscript bundled in saffron cloth, his stock of Srimad Bhagavatams, and his few personal effects he kept in the closet opposite his desk. On the wall above his sitting place, he hung an Indian calendar print of Lord Krishna. Krishna, as a youth, was playing on his flute with a cow close behind him. Krishna was standing on the planet Earth, which curved like the top of a small hill beneath his feet. There were two windows on the east wall, and the dappled morning sunlight filtering in through the fire escape fell across the floor. The next room was bare except for a fancy coffee table which became Prabhupada's altar. Here he placed a framed picture of Lord Chaitanya and his associates. On the wall he hung an Indian calendar print of four-armed Lord Vishnu and Ananshesha, the celestial snake, and as in the Bowery loft, he put up a clothesline. Both rooms were freshly painted, and the floors were clean hardwood parquet. The bathroom was clean and serviceable, as was the narrow furnished kitchen. Prabhupada would sometimes stand by the kitchen window, gazing beyond the courtyard wall. He had moved here without any prospects of paying the next month's rent. Although Carl, Mike, Carol, James, Bill, and others had encouraged him to move here, some of them now found it a little inconvenient to visit him regularly. But they all wished him well and hoped new people would come here to help him. They felt like that this location was the best yet, and he seemed more comfortable here. At the Paradox, Bill would spread the word of Swamiji's new address. See, all alone by himself. And then few boys and girls joined him. They were young hippies, not very reliable. And they're just all alone. Of course, Krishna was always with him, but physically he was all alone. The Lower East Side has a history of change and human suffering as old as New York. 300 years before Prabhupada's arrival, it had been part of Peter Stuyvesant's estate. Today's landmark of Tompkins Square Park had then been a salt marsh known as Stuyvesant's Swamp. The Lower East Side first became a slum in the 1840s when thousands of Irish immigrants, driven by the Irish potato famine, came and settled. 2 decades later, the Irish became the image of the Americans to the next immigrants, the Germans, who gradually grew in numbers to become the largest immigrant group in New York City. Next came East European Jews, Poles, and Ukrainians, and by 1900, the Lower East Side had become the most densely populated Jewish ghetto in the world. But in the next generation, the ghetto began to break up as Jews moved to the suburbs and economic advancement. Next, the Puerto Ricans thronged in hundreds of thousands in 1950s, immigrating from the island, poverty, or moving in from East Harlem. They and the Negroes from Harlem and Bedford Stuyvesant, who arrived next, were the new groups who, along with the Poles and Ukrainians, populated the 2 square miles of tenements and crowded streets that formed the Lower East Side slums in the 1960s. Then, only a few years before Prabhupada's arrival, a different kind of slum dweller had appeared on the Lower East Side. Although there have been many sociological and cultural analyses of this phenomenon, it remains ultimately inexplicable why they suddenly came, like a vast flock of birds swooping down, or like animals in great instinctual migration, and why after a few years they vanished. So America, as we know, it's a country where people would just migrate in from different parts of the world. Original Americans, there were so many of them were killed by these Europeans in 1700s. And then so many of them moved towards the mountains. So New York has always been an attraction for people to move in to America, to get the American dream. American dream is what? To make money, more opportunities than anywhere else in the world, and freedom. It's a freedom that America provides, whether it's religious freedom, freedom to speak, freedom to do whatever business you want to do. This is specialty of America. As long as you live within the law, framework of law, anybody is free. Nobody will bother you. So, but this Lower East Side, New York, wasn't very rich area to be in. So the new immigrants would always come there and they think this is it. But then slowly, if they work hard, their economic condition improves, then they move out. And then the new immigrants would come in. It's just different. It's not like India, because Indians are there for generations. So they would just live in their area, the families after family, but not here. They keep on moving. They find new opportunities somewhere else and they move out. So this is what Maharaj is explaining. At first, the newcomers were mostly young artists, musicians, and intellectuals, similar to the hip crowd of Prabhupada's Bowery days. Then came the young middle-class dropouts. Because living space was more available and rents were lower than in nearby Greenwich Village, they concentrated here on the Lower East Side, which in the parlance of the renting agent became known as East Village. Many even came without finding a place to live and camped in the hallways of tenements. Drawn by cheap rent and the promise of bohemian freedom, these young middle-class dropouts, the avant-garde of a nationwide youth movement, soon to be known in the media as hippies, wandered to the Lower East Side slums in living protest against America's good life of materialism. As if responding to an instinctual call, younger teenage runaways joined the older hippies And following the runaways came the police, counselors, social and welfare workers, youth hostels, and drug counseling centers. On St. Mark's Place, a new hip commercialism sprang up, with head shops, poster shops, record shops, art galleries, and bookstores that carried everything from cigarette papers to hip clothes and psychedelic feeling, lighting. The hippies journeyed to the Lower East Side in full conviction that this was the place to be, just as the immigrant predecessors had done. For the European immigrants of another age, New York Harbor had been the gateway to a land of riches and opportunity. As they at long last set their eyes on Manhattan skyline and the Statue of Liberty. Now in 1966, American youth thronged to New York City with hopes of their own and feasted on the vision of their newfound mystical land, the Lower East Side slums. It was an uneasy coexistence with hippies on one side and Puerto Ricans, Poles, and Ukrainians on the other. The established ethnic groups resented the newcomers who didn't really have to live in the slums, whereas they themselves did. In fact, many of the young newcomers were from immigrant families that had struggled for generations to establish themselves as middle-class Americans. Nevertheless, the young migration to the Lower East Side was just as real as the immigration of Puerto Ricans or Poles or Ukrainians had been, although the motives, of course, were quite different. The hippies had turned from the suburban materialism of their parents, the inane happiness of TV and advertising, the ephemeral goals of middle-class America. They were disillusioned by parents, teachers, clergy, public leaders, and the media, dissatisfied with American policy in Vietnam, and allured by radical political ideologies that exposed America as a cruel, selfish, exploitative giant who must now reform or die. And they were searching for real love, real peace, real existence, and real spiritual consciousness. See, ultimately, obviously, Krishna controls everything. There is nothing beyond Krishna. So for this movement to take hold, people like hippies were necessary because they were completely disillusioned by materialism, what their parents were living in, and whatever America was offering. Of course, the same materialism was very attractive for the immigrants. But American youth, they were disillusioned. And that's how they were getting to drugs, just living life without any boundaries. And they were looking for real love, real peace, real existence. They were looking for something. And no wonder Krishna had put Prabhupada in the center at 26 Second Avenue. And with his kirtan and with his obviously purity, his lectures, he would attract this youth. And this is what we'll read later on. Okay, so we'll stop here. See anybody has any questions or comments? Okay, you all have safe and wonderful day. Hare Krishna. Jai Srila.